من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله. صلى الله عليك وعلى أهل بيتك المظلومين. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي يا أبا عبد الله، يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة. غريب يا مظلوم كربلاء، يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والذين يصلون ما أمر الله به أن يوصل ويخشون ربهم ويخافون سوء الحساب. صدق الله العلي العظيم وصدق رسوله الكريم، وإنا على ذلك لمن الشاهدين. لتعجيل فرج المولى صاحب العصر والزمان، عطروا أفواهكم ونوروا مجلسكم بالصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. Last night we began speaking about the topic of Salat al-Rahm, of family ties. And we spoke about its importance, its significance, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said about it, and He has made it on the same level as being God-fearing and having taqwa. And we also spoke about the fiqh and what the jurists have to say about it from that perspective. And we came to the conclusion that this Salat al-Rahm is one of, if not the most beloved acts of worship to Allah Azza wa Jal. And when you look at the lives of the most noble people to ever live, prophets, messengers, imams, righteous people, you'll find that each and every one of them made this as a priority in their life. Famously, you'll look at the story of Nabiullah Yusuf in the Holy Quran, where his brothers, at a very young age, out of jealousy, they place him in a well, and he goes through all these trials and tribulations and this tough life, until one day he's in a powerful position. He has authority, and then his brothers are under his mercy. Those brothers that put him through all these things, yet what? He forgives them. He's merciful towards them. He shows them love. Likewise, our Holy Prophet, salawatullahi alayhi wa alih, when you look at Rasulullah, you'll find that those who were the biggest supporters of Rasulullah, those who stood side by side with him to help him support, to help him deliver the message of Islam, to help him spread the message of Islam, that helped him personally, that helped him emotionally, were his relatives. The likes of Abu Talib, the likes of Hamza, his uncles. Abu Talib, who takes him in like his own son. Hamza, who's that brave lion in war, fighting side by side with his nephew. He had the likes of Ali ibn Abi Talib, who was nafsu Rasulullah. It was like the closest person to him, that he didn't even say like my brother, he said like myself. He had the likes of Fatima bint Asad, who in the words of Rasulullah, he says to Ali, he says, she was like my mother. In fact, she was my mother. Just like she was your mother, she was my mother. Fatima bint Asad used to Even when she has a small amount of food, she makes sure that she feeds Rasulullah first, and then she feeds the rest of her kids. And then on the flip side, you find that the biggest enemies of Rasulullah, the biggest opposition to Rasulullah, were also from his relatives. The likes of Abu Lahab, another uncle of the Prophet. Abu Lahab, who was one of the staunchest opposition, the most vocal opposition to Rasulullah, stood up against Rasulullah to the point where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends an entire chapter, Tabbat yada Abi Lahab. He labels Rasulullah as a magician. And then you have the rest of Quraysh, because Quraysh are all related. It's a tribe. It's not like today. It's a whole tribe taking that town, the tribe of Quraysh, with clans, 25 clans. And within these clans are Banu Hashim, Banu Umayyah, Banu Adi, and others. So they're all related. So when you hear sometimes that Rasulullah faced all these harsh things and he was attacked by Quraysh, we sometimes think Quraysh are strangers to Rasulullah. However, Quraysh are the relatives. They're all related. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that it's not always an easy thing. That your relatives and maintaining these relationships and having these relatives is not always an easy thing to have. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places these relatives in your lives as a test. We have a narration in Bihar al-Anwar that is narrated to us from the maid of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Her name is Salima. Salima, she says, I was in the house of Imam al-Sadiq in his final moments, Sa'at al-Ihtidar. She says Imam al-Sadiq was losing consciousness and then coming back to consciousness. Literally these final moments. And then he called out, he opened his eyes and he called out, he says, I want to leave my will. I have my testament. I want to split up my inheritance of whatever money that I have. He has the right to split it, a third of it. She says, he says, give this amount of money to this person, this amount of money to that person. And then he says, I want you to give Al-Hasan Al-Aftas 70 dinars. 70 gold dinars to Al-Hasan Al-Aftas. Who's Al-Hasan Al-Aftas? The cousin of Imam Al-Sadiq. Salima says, when I heard this, she says to him, O son of Rasulullah, you're giving Al-Hasan Al-Aftas 70 gold dinars. It's a big amount of money. Isn't this Hasan Al-Aftas the one who tried to kill you? He's the cousin of Imam Al-Sadiq, who literally carried a knife or sharp object and attempted to kill Imam Al-Sadiq. Yet you're leaving him 70 dinars. He says to her, O Salima, do you want me to not be from those that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَالَّذِينَ يَصِلُونَ مَا أَمَرَ اللَّهُ بِهِ أَن يُوصَلْ وَيَخْشَوْنَ رَبَّهُمْ وَيَخَافُونَ سُوءَ الْحِسَابِ. And then he said, O Salima, إِنَّ اللَّهَ خَلَقَ الْجَنَّةَ فَطَيَّبَهَا وَطَيَّبَ رِيحَهَا وَإِنَّ رِيحَهَا لَيُوجَدْ مِنْ مَسِيرَةِ أَلْفِ عَامٍ. Says, O Salima, Allah created heaven and gave it this beautiful fragrance that can be smelt from 1,000 years distance-wise. Walking, whatever, very long distance. فَلَا يَجِدُ رِيحَهَا عَاقٍ وَلَا قَاطِعِ رَحْمٍ. O Salima, Allah has created this paradise, beautified it with a fragrance. However, the person who is bad to their parents, that has uquq al-walidain, that treats their parents badly, doesn't take care of their parents, doesn't listen to their parents, when they ask them to do the right thing. And those that cut off their relationships with their families, it's not that they won't enter into heaven. They won't even smell the fragrance of heaven. So now, let us look at the positive impacts that having Salat al-Rahim can have on our lives. The first is prolonging the life. طول العمر. That's one of the, you'll find many narrations stating that Salat al-Rahim, maintaining these family ties, prolongs the life. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he says to Maysir. Maysir is one of the companions of Imam al-Sadiq. He says to him, Ya Maysir, what is this thing that you're doing that keeps prolonging your life? Just imagine that you're sitting with the Imam and the Imam tells you, you should have been dead by now. But there's this one thing that you do that keeps prolonging your life. And the Imam knows what it is, but he wants others to hear. Maysir, he says, يا ميسر لقد زيد في عمرك فأي شيء تعمل. He says, كنت أجيرا وأنا غلام ب5 دراهم فكنت أجريها على خالي. He says, I was a worker, أجير, when I was a young boy, and I used to earn 5 dirahim. And all these 5 dirahim, I used to give them to my uncle. That's what prolonged his life. Now, طول العمر, some scholars say that you're going to live 60 years, but this 60 years will be, this life that you have will be filled with barakah, with blessing. Some scholars say that, no, what it means is when you die, you'll live on through your memory, through your good memory. People will remember you in a good way. And other scholars say, no, طول العمر is physically, you will get actually more years added to your life. Imam al-Sadiq says, and listen to this very carefully. He says, ما رأينا شيئا. We do not know anything. We haven't seen anything. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. الثاني على حب الحسن والحسين. الثالث على حب فاطمة الزهراء بأعلى أصواتكم. ما رأينا شيئا يزيد في العمر. We have not seen anything, or we don't know anything that increases life إلا, except one thing, صلة الرحم. فإن الرجل لربما بقي من أجله 3 سنين. If a man there was only 3 years left in his life, فيصل رحمه فيكتب له 30 سنة. Someone, Allah has decreed that he will live for 3 more years. He does Salat al-Rahm. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will add 30 years. And then he will have 33 years to live. وَإِنَّ الرَّجُلَ لَيَقْطُعْ رَحْمَهُ فَيَنْقُصْ مِنْهُ 30 سَنَةً فَيَكُونَ أَجَلَهُ 3 سنين. Or someone was decreed for him to live 33 years. He cuts off his family connections. He dies in 3 years. This is narration from Imam al-Sadiq. Now, some of you might ask, how does that work? Hasn't Allah already decided that I will live to this age? Yes, Allah decides how long you'll live, but sometimes Allah decides and then adds a condition. You will live for 60 years, but if he does Salat al-Rahm, he'll live for 80. He will live 60 years, there's a condition that Allah puts, but if he doesn't do Salat al-Rahm, he will die in 40 years. That's how it works, my dear brothers and sisters. The second impact, or the second positive impact, is increase in wealth. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله إن القوم ليكونون فجرا ولا يكونون برارا فيصلون أرحامهم فتنمى أموالهم. Rasulullah says There will be people who are fajara, who are people who are corrupt, sinners. They're nowhere near the religion, but they connect with their family. They have Salat al-Rahim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will increase their wealth. They'll see blessing in their wealth. Now some people will say, how do these work? How does this work? How does me calling my family member or maintaining a connection increase my life? Give me more money. This is from the asrar. These are the secrets of Allah. We don't know exactly how it works, but we know that this is what we are told. This is what the Imams have told us, what Rasulullah has told us. The third thing is, Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam says that it purifies your a'mal. Inna salat al-rahm tuzakki al-a'mal. You have a amal, a salah, a worship, a ibadah that is not complete, that is missing something, that you did it maybe not in the right way or the perfect way. Imam al-Baqir says that salat al-rahm will purify that deed, will increase the blessings, and you'll get extra thawab. Number 4, my dear brothers and sisters, what we get from having that salat al-rahm is social security. And what do I mean by social security? Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says, إنه لا يستغني الرجل وإن كان ذا مال عن عترته ودفاعهم عنه بأيديهم وألسنتهم وهم أعظم الناس حيطة من ورائه وألمهم لشعثه. Amir al-Mu'mineen says that no matter how much money you have or wealth you have, you can never not be in need of your family, because no one will support them like them. No one will have your back like them. No one will feel, when you're feeling sad, when you're going through a tough time, no one will feel what they feel towards you. Number 6, my dear brothers and sisters, is that it makes our final moments easier. Sa'at al-ihtidar, sakarat al-maut. These are tough times. These are not easy times. Imam al-Hadi narrates that Nabiullah Musa, he asked Allah about this, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him that having that salat al-rahm makes these times easier. Now some people will say, all right, these are all great things, but I've been doing them. Like, I've been really maintaining all my family connections, all my salat al-rahm, but I didn't necessarily see this impact in my life. For example, when we heard about the wealth, everyone wants to increase their wealth. Who doesn't want to increase their wealth? I have salat al-rahm, but I haven't seen that increase in rizq or wealth. It's because sometimes there's another thing that's stopping it. There's a hajib. For example, you do salat al-rahm, that's meant to bring you wealth, however you don't pay khums. So that cancels that one out. Sometimes you go and you do salat al-rahm, you maintain your family ties, but it's not the right intention. You're not doing it sincerely for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. You're doing it because of any other worldly benefit, and that blocks it out. Because salat al-rahm, my dear brothers and sisters, is something that it's proven that you will see the impact in this life. Now, the danger of cutting off family ties. Number 1, shorter life. We already went through this. I'm not going to go through it again. If your life was 33 years, it will be 3 years if you had left in your life. Number 2, the punishment will be expedited. How many sins do we make? Do we fall into? Some big sins, some small sins. And if Allah Azza wa Jal wanted to, He can punish us at any time. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, he says, لا يموت الرجل عن ثلاثة أشياء حتى يرى وبالهن. He says, a man won't die until he sees the impact in this life from these 3 things. البغي واليمين الكاذبة وقطيعة الرحم. When you make false pledges and when you cut off your family ties. And then Imam al-Sadiq says, ما من ذنب أجدر أن يعجل الله لصاحبه العقوبة في الدنيا مع ما يدخر له في الآخرة من قطيعة الرحم والخيانة والكذب. He says there's no other sin or thing that you can do in this life to expedite the punishment that will fall onto you in this life other than betrayal, al-khiyana, lying, al-kadhib, and qati'at al-rahim. Number 3, your dua won't be accepted. How many times do we make dua to Allah Azza wa Jal? For different things. And we say our dua is not being accepted. Rasulullah says, قطع الرحم يمنع استجابة الدعاء. Number 4, I mentioned this earlier, but I'll mention it again, is not entering Jannah. عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله 3 لا يدخلون الجنة مدمن خمر ومؤمن سحر وقاطع رحم. 3 people don't enter paradise. Someone who's addicted to alcohol, someone who believes in magic, and someone who cuts off their family ties. Each one of these things, if I wanted, I could probably bring you 50, 20, 30 ahadith narrations for each one. Many narrations from all our imams regarding this matter, my brothers and sisters. Now, finally, with a couple of minutes that we have left, let's discuss some of the common reasons why we have this, why we cut off our family connections. Number one thing, and I think this is the number one thing people will say, is they cut me off. You know, one of our scholars who's passed away, he says, you know, the most sincere type of Salat al-Rahm, the most honest display of Salat al-Rahm is when they have cut you off. Because only then are you doing it only for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. Because when they haven't cut you off, it might be because they visited you, you're returning the favor, you want something from them. But when they've cut you off and you do the Salat al-Rahm, that's the most sincere. That's how you know it's purely for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. Number 2 is when we delay the resolving of our issues. You have a problem, you have a small argument, for example, and you delay it. You don't talk to each other. And as time goes on, this grows bigger and bigger. There's more people involved, there's more people that talk. One person says this to that person, one person says that to the other person, and it becomes a problem. One day Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he had a disagreement with his cousin Abdullah ibn al-Hasan, who goes back to Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. They had a disagreement during Maghrib time, and their voices went up. They were loud, people can hear them. Now obviously Imam al-Sadiq is a ma'soom, so the fault is from his cousin. This was during Maghrib, and then they went their separate paths. They each went home. And then a man by the name of Safwan al-Jammal, he says, I woke up very early in the morning in Fajr time. And as I'm walking, I see Imam al-Sadiq at the door of Abdullah ibn al-Hasan, waiting for him to come out. His mate comes out, and then Abdullah ibn al-Hasan comes and he says, Ma bakkara bika ya Aba Abdullah. Maghrib, they were having a very loud argument. Imam al-Sadiq, Fajr time, is at his door. Imam al-Sadiq says to him, last night I read the ayah in the Quran, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والذين يصلون ما أمر الله به أن يوصل ويخشون ربهم ويخافون سوء الحساب. He says, then they started crying and hugging each other. The quicker you resolve it, you have an argument in an hour's time, not an hour next day. The quicker you resolve the issue, the smaller it is. The less likely it is to drag on and drag on and drag on. Animosity. We become enemies. With the woman, probably more so. We went to ask for their daughter's hand in marriage for our son, and they said no. So now I'm not going to go to my sister's house. That's it. The relationship is over. It's like that's the end of the world. This is marriage. It can happen, it cannot happen. Whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written. We take all these things, these normal things, and we create a bigger problem out of it. No time. Number 4, I don't have time. I'm busy. I'm working. It's not really that you're busy or you don't have time. You know, the number one thing when people say they have no time is that they don't organize their time. They don't have priorities. You know, you have time to play PlayStation, you have time to scroll on TikTok or Facebook for hours. You don't have time for what? 1 minute to send a message, to call. Can you even use that excuse? You haven't talked to someone for months and, oh, sorry, I didn't have time, I've been busy. No, you haven't been busy. You just haven't prioritized this. Number 5 is when someone prevents it. That's when problems are inherited. Sometimes you'll go to someone and say, why don't you speak to your cousin? He'll tell you, I don't know. 20 years ago, our dads had a fight, our fathers had a fight, and now the entire family and generations, they don't speak to each other. They've inherited the problems of their fathers. And the blame is to be put on the elders, because they have for example, he has a fight with his brother or his cousin. He tells his kids, you also don't speak to their kids. You also don't speak to your uncle. And that is haram. That is ordering amr. He's ordering them to do something that is batil, that is wrong. And the other one is the partners. The husband has a fight or a problem with his wife's parents, with his wife's family. He tells his wife, you're not going to your family. You're not going to your parents' house. You and the kids. Sayyid Sistani, you know the rights of a husband on a wife. There's 2. There's only 2. One of those rights is that she tells him when she leaves the house. She needs his permission. As Sayyid Sistani says that if she's going to perform Salat al-Rahm to visit her family, she doesn't need her husband's permission. You can't stop her from doing something that's a wajib on her. It's not just the husband, sometimes the wife. You know, I have a problem with your family. This member said this to me, your sister, your mother said this. She plants all these seeds, these ideas in his head, and then over time they grow, and then the husband, you find some husbands, some sons, they've cut off their mothers. And I know personally of this. He hasn't seen his mom in 6 months. He has a kid. He has a newborn. His mom hasn't seen the kid. Because his mom, when he wanted to marry his wife, she didn't agree. She told him, maybe I'll find someone else for you. So now that wife has a problem with his mother, and she's planted these ideas in his head to that point. At the end of the day, my dear brothers and sisters, this is a reminder for myself first and foremost, before any of you. Because this is not an easy thing. It's very hard. Sometimes it's hard for us to control our emotions. We feel a certain way from certain people. And Salat al-Rahm is not to be best friends with these people, with your family and your connections and people that you're related to. But it's maintaining that connection. That's what a salah means, connection. Some sort of connection. If when you see them they cause you harm, they bring you things or problems, just maintain some sort of connection, my dear brothers and sisters. And the only way that we can maintain Salat al-Rahm is if you view Salat al-Rahm, if you change your perspective, that this is a ibadah, that I'm doing this as a form of worship, purely for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jalla, and I don't want anything else from it. My dear brothers and sisters, that my final message is that tonight, and this goes to me first and foremost, and to you, that if you have anyone from your family and your connections that you don't speak to, or you have someone that you haven't reached out in a while, make sure that you reach out to them purely for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jalla, and so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will include you in His mercy. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين.